Well, here we are, Renee, another episode. Can you believe it? 2025. We're rolling through it.
I cannot believe it. Here we are. It's going and it's going so fast. I can't believe it at all. So Jason, when it's the middle of January and the world is frozen, what happens on the farm at that time? I'm sure your brain is somewhere else planning for the future. So you got things you're planning to do, conferences you're going to. What's going on in the farm world?
Yeah, well, this time of year in the agricultural world is when all the conferences happen, Renee. And so I'm going to have to go to Orlando and learn how
Have
to be a
to.
better farmer for this. I have to. It's part of the
Have
farming
to.
group that I'm part of. So we're gonna be having some planter clinics, learning about strip till. There's a lot of data that's released from part of the group. We help to put data in. We do a lot of tests, and so we do a lot of trials with different companies. And so this is the big data reveal. So we have to go down to SeaWorld in Orlando and see how we paired against farmers all across the country. So it's a sacrifice. I told my wife as well. I'm really sorry, but she's in the school, so she just can't take time off to go to Orlando with me because that's one she might go along with. But I'm like, I may have to. I told her the flights didn't work out. I'm gonna have to spend a couple extra days on the front end and the back end of that one.
You may be living
Self-care.
in the doghouse when you get back.
I
So
know,
I
I
hear how
know,
this
that's
is
true.
going.
But that's
You
what
may just
farmers
live
do
in
in
your
January. Well,
You're going to be
unless
living in that shed on the farm is what's going to happen.
Well, I
I
should
saw there's a
clarify.
couch out there. So good
This is
luck to
what
you.
row crop farmers, right? If you're raising cattle or pigs, you can never leave. And so this is the
Oh, that's
benefit
true.
of being a row crop farmer because I get all those
Mm.
ranchers out there. They get really mad at me because I make it sound really cushy. This is why the Iowa, Illinois row crop farmers get a really bad rap sometimes because
Because it is really cushy. No, I won't go
yeah.
there. All right, Jason. So we have a special guest with us today that you've met in Nebraska. So I thought maybe you could kick us off, Jason, and tell us how you've met Annette and why we've invited her today, and then we'll let Annette tell us all about herself. But Jason, how did you meet Annette, and what are we going to be talking about today?
Yeah, well, last year, Renee, we wrapped up that project working, with that legislative special project we did around Lincoln Regional Center. And so we were able to make all kinds of connections across the state. And Annette, of course, is one of the primary connections when we think about the Nebraska Association of Behavioral Health Organizations. You really can't have a conversation about in Nebraska about behavioral health without talking with Annette. So that's why once we got done with that report, I'm like, and I heard a couple of Annette's podcasts. She's doing a lot of great work over across the river. I'm like, well, we need to get Annette on our podcast. And so welcome, Annette. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and Nebraska Association of Behavioral Health Organizations? I hate calling it NABHO. We don't like acronyms here. So I will say it all out loud and you can call it whatever you want. Tell us about yourself.
Well, very good. Well, first, Jason, it's just really good. I'm a farmer too, and
Yeah.
there's not very many farmers in our world.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so, as a state association, we're a member of the National Council for Mental Well-being, and I think I'm the
Mhm.
token farmer in the National
Oh,
Association
Yeah.
wow.
as well. So anytime there's an ag-related issue, it seems like I always get, not that there's a lot of ag-related
Right.
issues in mental health, but certainly farmers can benefit from behavioral health. So yeah, so when I hear you talk about, now we are livestock farmers as well, so
Okay.
we don't
Mm.
get to take off during
Right.
the
No
winter
trips to
months.
Orlando.
No trips to Orlando. No, no. So January is usually getting ready for the cows to start
Right.
calving, and
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. That's right.
the end of the year tax stuff, and then getting
Yeah.
seed bought and all that other stuff. So that's what
Yeah.
January and February are like in my world, along with the job
Okay.
that I do here. And
Right.
then, of course, talking about NABHO, and that's our acronym. That's what we call ourselves because it takes a long time to say the Nebraska
Right.
Association of Behavioral Health Organizations. So I can talk all day about our association. I'm so proud of our members and the work that they do. I was hired a little over 10 and a half years ago as their first executive director. NABHO ran it pretty much themselves. They had an executive committee, they held monthly meetings. Prior to my coming into this position, I served as a state senator for 8 years. So I was
Oh,
familiar with the
Hmm.
association
wow.
through my work in the legislature because even though I came in with an ag background, I somehow got pulled into mental health issues, and that kind of
Oh.
became one of my specialty areas. And my first legislative aide was a social worker by trade, so she,
Oh.
she kind of helped acclimate me to the behavioral health world. So anyway, I was familiar with the association, had a great deal of respect for them. So as I was approaching the end of my second term, we have term limits in Nebraska, so you
Right.
can serve 8 years. Coming to the end of my 8 years and thinking I was just going to go back to the farm, but also felt like, gosh, I have all this knowledge and this experience, and I've made, some incredible connections. And, could there be anything out there that I could still be on the farm, but also maybe engage with or work? And at that time, the association had been working to position itself to be able to hire an executive director. And so their lobbyists told me, hey, NABHO is looking to hire an executive director. So I met with their president at the time. I'm like, I live 120 miles from Lincoln. If you would hire someone like me, how would that work? And he was just like, oh, piece of cake, no problems. We can make it work. We don't meet that often. You wouldn't have to come to Lincoln that often. Ha ha. And so anyway, I applied for the job and I got it. So that's how I have ended up where I am today. And I do go to Lincoln more than once a month. I find I spend a lot of time in Lincoln. But I have a daughter and a son-in-law and 4 beautiful grandchildren who live in Lincoln. So it's not
Oh.
like, oh man, do I have to go to Lincoln again?
Right.
In fact, my grandchildren refer to the guest bedroom in their house as that's grandma's room. So my poor son-in-law,
Good.
my son-in-law puts up with his mother-in-law way
Yeah.
more than most should have to. But I try to earn my keep by babysitting and doing a few other things like that. So coming in as their first executive director, it was just new territory for all of us. And, the lobbyist at that time, they had done a lot of the administrative work for the association. So me kind of stepping in and starting to take that over and taking some of the pressure off of the executive committee, who up until that time had carried the full load. So just kind of establishing what is the job description for an executive director of a behavioral health association. And again, my members were just so gracious and so appreciative of having someone who could do the duties of running the association, that they just pretty much gave me, wide range to do whatever I felt like needed to be done with the association. So at the time when I joined, we had just over 40 members, I think. I don't remember the exact number, 42, 43, something like that. We are now up to 60 members. And we'll be adding a few more as this year goes on. So we've really worked at growing the association. And I think we've been able to do that because we've had some pretty big successes over the last 10 and a half years. Time and time again, when I survey members for member satisfaction, when I go back and look at some of the old surveys and some of the work that NABHO did, and asking, why do you belong to NABHO? Hands down, far and away, it's advocacy. Members want someone that's advocating on their behalf, that they have a voice at the state level, and then through our state association, being a member of the national association, we have that voice at the federal level as well. So that was clear to me. That's where I need to be spending most of my time. And so we've worked. And we have a variety of issues every year, but the bread and butter issue is always rates. The majority of my members are nonprofits. They serve a high percentage of Medicaid clients. And so rates that's just, someone once said to me, is that all you guys do is talk about money? I'm like, well, it's not all we talk about, but it's kind of the foundation for what we do. And if our members aren't being paid, it makes it difficult. Our mantra is, rates equal capacity and capacity equals access. So it's all about building that capacity so that we can have access to care. And so again, advocacy, that's the issue we work on. And then we kind of branch off into other issues. Telehealth has become a big issue for us. Regulations, while that doesn't necessarily involve legislation, we try to stay engaged with regulation changes, so that, we can be on top of those things and help those agencies that are looking at changing regulations understand the impact. We also engage a lot with the managed care companies. We have managed care in Nebraska. We have 3 managed care companies that our members work with all the time. So we hold at least quarterly meetings with all three of the managed care companies. Just try to keep good lines of communication open with them. My members can let me know, hey, I'm having this issue. I can reach out to the managed care companies. They're usually very responsive when I reach out to them with questions or concerns. So that's where I spend the bulk of my time.
You sound very busy. Like, where do you find the time to do all of these things? You said one thing I just want to circle back to is the advocacy, right? And we've heard over and over again, speaking with legislators in Nebraska, how hard it is to move things forward because of term limits. The unintended consequence of term limits is because behavioral health, especially, is so complicated that no one really is able to ever go in and fix anything, because just when you figure it out, you're done. Because generally, we all know, right? You've been in the legislature, we work with it. Renee's been in the legislature here in Iowa. It takes a long time, sometimes multi-sessions, to be able to fix something. And it doesn't happen all overnight. It has to happen in iterations to allow a system to grow or to contract, to be able to bring everyone along. And so, what do you think about term limits? Because has that made your job of advocacy and being able to help guide legislation harder? Or do you think that the benefits outweigh?
I've never been a fan of term limits, even before I was elected to the legislature. And especially in Nebraska, we have the only unicameral in the nation. So we are a
Right.
one house legislature. So
Right.
we have, while in some respects that's easy because we have only 49 senators that we have to deal with, we don't have that other house to work with. But our unicameral system also makes it very easy to engage with, and citizen interaction is very easy. But again, term limits, 8 years, it takes you the first 4 years just to figure out where all the bathrooms are. And then after that, and getting up to speed on these issues. And so, I found in my time, I was one of the first classes that came in after term limits was enacted. You kind of start to, for lack of a better word, specialize. So you find those issues where you can devote your time to, and every senator kind of, whether it's in the area of their expertise or something that they stumble into when they come into the legislature. I stumbled into the mental health issues because my second or third year in the legislature, we had the safe haven issue. And I don't know if you remember that, but in the legislature's wisdom, we were one of the only states in the nation that didn't have legislation that allowed women who had an unexpected pregnancy to, drop a baby off in a safe place without fear of repercussions. So we passed that legislation, but since we couldn't decide on what the appropriate age was, so we didn't put any age in it. And so then all of a sudden we had parents and caregivers dropping 12 and 13 and 14-year-olds off at emergency rooms because these were children who were having severe mental health issues, and the parents were at the end of their ropes and couldn't find help for them. So that just was a crisis, major crisis. But we ended up having a special session where we came back and we put an age limit in. But I became very involved with that, and we passed some pretty significant legislation dealing with workforce, and we created the family helpline and other things. So term limits has definitely, it makes our work as advocates that much harder. And that's what I have to really impress upon my members. I'm your frontline person, and your lobbyist is your frontline person, but we really need you. And so helping them be comfortable becoming the advocates that we need. But you have a condensed amount of time to help senators understand a very complex system.
Yeah, I would think with term limits too, you end up with a more interesting pool of people, but at some points finding people to want to be in office might become challenging too. You only do have the 49 for the one chamber, so maybe that's easier. But yeah, when I walked in the front door, I was a freshman, did not understand. I was the only person in the building that had my background in mental health, specifically children's mental health. So I walked in the door and got everybody's question in the building, every email on the topic. If there was a legislator that needed something about, and they get all those messages, I don't know what to do with my kid. And I got all of them from the first day. And I was like, I don't know where the bathrooms are. This is nuts. And so it was really, really crazy how quickly, you're right. And I ended up more term limited out because we have that, you probably heard we have this a bipartisan way to do the maps where we never get to look at maps. It's all computer generated, so nobody knows who's thrown in with each other. And my map I hit was over a biennium, and my map turned unfavorable, so I got kicked back out. So I was out pretty quickly as well, just because of my map, not so much because of term limits. But yeah, and the other challenge you have is you end up with staff who, bureaucrats who run and make all the decisions in your state because they're the ones that are there and understand the issues. And if they're not necessarily educated correctly on issues, they're making some really funny decisions that don't play out well for your members. And so I'm sure for you, part of your job too is defending your members, because if they go and pass legislation and don't know how it applies to your people, right? The fallout is on you and your folks. And so
Absolutely, absolutely.
that's a pain in the tail right there whenever that happens. So I used to argue with other legislators who wanted to pass stuff that I'm like, look, I actually do this job on the ground and it needs to actually work. So stop that. I'm like, stop sticking stuff in these bills that are just to make you look good. Stop that. This has to actually work. It's like, if we're going to redesign a system, which is what I did in the legislature, it has to function at the end. So stop screwing with it. And it was a lot of big arguments about that kind of stuff. So tell us, you were talking about how many members you have, and are the providers themselves groups, or do you have individuals? So do you have like solopreneurs and people in there, or do they have to be an agency, or what type of person is a member of your group? Are they hospitals?
We have a wide variety of members, but they are organizations. We don't have
Okay.
individual
Okay.
memberships.
Okay.
And we have community mental health providers, we have substance use disorder providers, we have hospitals, we have
Okay.
the regional behavioral health authorities. We also have consumer groups. So we really do
Mm.
try to be that good cross section of representation of the behavioral health system in our state. And have that admiration has just grown. Is, I mean, these are, you're talking about hospitals like CHI and Bryan and Boys Town, down to some small, very, the
Right.
rural mom and pop kind of organizations, but yet they are all able to come together. And we have members who have their own lobbyists who go out and work on their own particular issues on their own, but they come to NABHO recognizing that rising tide raises all boats. And what do we need to work on collectively? What makes good across the state policy for behavioral health? And so they really do put their particular issues, their particular priorities aside when it comes to working. So we recognize it's really important. We can't afford to be, fighting amongst ourselves. We have to come together. We have to be that strong representation of what it takes to have a good system of care in the state.
And I think that's a challenge for you, because when I think about the rural, Western Nebraska, and then going all the way to the east side where 80-90% of your population, is in a very small area, it must be very challenging to look at that big picture, and think about a system. I know, in our conversations in Nebraska, that's been a challenge in the past. It's a challenge today, in a lot of different ways, and initiatives moving forward like CCBHCs. So how do you think the association is working to help everyone understand that, this has to work for everybody? It just can't work in that one big county. How do you approach that?
Well, I think it's taking more of that big picture view. And, I'll be honest, the majority of our members are from the Grand Island, Kearney area east, and especially the
Yeah.
Omaha, Lincoln area. So once you get past Grand Island, Kearney, there's probably more cows than people as you look at some of
Well,
those counties.
yeah.
And we do have a few members who are out in the far western part of the state. And so I
Mhm.
work really hard to make sure that I'm reaching out to those members who are in those lesser populated areas. But what I found was, even though there might be nuances, there's so much more commonalities. Workforce is as much of an issue in
Yep.
Omaha and Lincoln as it is in Scottsbluff and
Yep.
Gering. Just educating people in general about what is mental illness. What is a mental illness? What is an addiction? Policymakers as well as the general public. Improving those telehealth services. They're needed as much in the urban area as they are in the rural areas. So there is that, like I said, there's the nuances, and you have to kind of make sure that those are considered when you're talking about these things. But at the end of the day, it's that what builds that strong system that will reach out across the state. I remember trying to bring a group of people together when we were talking about emergency protected custody. And we were
Mm.
never, their law enforcement challenges, the urban areas, we weren't ever able to come up with what's a good policy for EPC. I don't know if there is such a thing, but
Right.
that was probably one of the more challenging issues. But otherwise, all providers are dealing with managed care companies, all providers are dealing with rates. So I think we have more in common than we don't. So it hasn't been that much of a challenge.
Well, why don't we switch gears? What's on the legislative platter this year? What are you guys focusing on? What are the top issues that you're advocating for?
Well, we're just now, kind of putting the finishing touches on, what we're going to be doing as far as any legislation we introduce or what are the priorities going to be. And over the last probably 6 to 8 years, we've been very successful in the legislature. We had some incredible advocates inside the legislature who carried legislation for us very successfully, and we received some pretty significant rate increases that really helped us. And so, we've kind of been riding on that success for a while. Well, now, we have a new administration, we have different senators, we've lost some of those champions, and so we're having to rebuild those champions. But the focus over the last couple of years with this new administration has been property tax relief. And so, behavioral health isn't the only one on, that's in the crosshairs, but we are in the crosshairs. And so, will we be able to secure additional rate increases? We're just not sure about that. We're going to come in and make our case as to why. But we did have to, in the last legislative session, we took a $15 million cut to the Division of Behavioral Health.
Right.
And then there was another attempt to take another $8 million during the special session. We were able to beat that $8 million. Senators understand what we've been able to do because of those rate increases. And even with those rate increases, and you're never going to get paid costs when you're relying on the public system to pay you, but you can't afford to be that far under cost and continue to keep that capacity and that access up. So we're going to be really working on helping our members tell their stories to senators. We are reaching out to the newly elected senators, getting them into the agencies so they can see firsthand the work that our members do. So a lot of education, we've got to just hold the line right now and be successful in telling our stories. We're looking at some managed care legislation to make sure that that legislation has been in place over 10 years now. Do we need to do some updates to that legislation? And there's some other things that we'll probably get involved with related with telehealth, making sure that that's a system that remains, good and strong. We've got some other issues that I don't know if we'll have legislation on, but again, just continuing to educate senators about what's going on, just so we don't take any hits. So it's laying that groundwork right now. And then, we don't know what's going to be in the governor's budget. We hope at the very least, it'll be neutral for us. We will come in and ask for a rate increase. What that's going to look like just yet, we don't know. But since we don't know what the governor's budget's going to be like, we have to be prepared on all fronts and to, again, be able to tell our story and why the support of the legislature has been so important to us in the past and why, and making those, we do a lot of connecting the dots. Okay, so we're talking about mental health. Where does mental health come into play when you're dealing with corrections? Where does mental health come into play when you're dealing with schools? Where does mental health come into play maintaining a healthy workforce? What does it mean for employers? All of those connections that mental health may not be front and center in, but plays a role. So we're doing a lot of that, connecting the dots with all of the other players in the mix.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing that we've noticed in Nebraska is there's not a lot of clear definition. And so we talk with a lot of groups and even departments within the state itself aren't sure what their roles and responsibilities are because it's not actually defined anywhere in statute or code. And so, in some places it might make sense to better define, and you're adding CCBHCs over the next year. And I think that's a reshuffling of the deck chairs, if you will. That's going to impact providers across the board as to who are those CCBHCs going to be? Are they going to be in existence to cover every Nebraskan? Are they going to be able, is there one, there's some areas that haven't even have a CCBHC identified yet, and they're supposed to all be identified by this point. So, I think there is a lot of opportunity to better define and make sure those limited funds are going to an area that can make the most impact. So I think you are going to have your hands full the next couple of sessions with some of those big changes across the landscape that are going to be impactful, certainly.
We think the CCBHCs are really going to help us better define that conversation going forward. We do have the CCBHCs selected. So we do have 7 of them that have been selected.
Yeah.
And they're in the process right now of, finalizing that SPA, getting that state plan amendment approved. And we are appreciative that this administration has been 100% on board with CCBHCs. So we're going to take that as, okay, we're not going to have to push back on anything related to CCBHCs, but we're hoping, again, that CCBHC, that rising tide raises all boats. So no, not everybody, especially as you get into the more rural and frontier areas of our state, can be a CCBHC. But what will that ripple effect look like for getting those CCBHCs in place in the state? So that was, when you talked about sometimes it takes multiple years, that was a multiple year project for us to get to where we are today. In fact, I remember thinking when I'd go to the national council meetings and I'd listen to everybody talking about their CCBHCs going, oh, it's never going to happen in Nebraska. Why can't it happen in Nebraska? But it has, and it has because it's taken multiple years of education. And then we got a senator who was on the appropriations committee, which is so key, who really took it and ran with it. And she worked with the administration. So I would agree with you. Our system is not well defined in the state, or even if it is, it's not well understood. So I'm hoping that the CCBHCs are going to help us in that area.
Fantastic. Well, before we go to Renee's Recovering Politician Self-Care Policy of the Week, Annette, is there anything you want to leave us with? A final thought? This has been a great conversation today.
Well, part of our mission statement is to build alliances. And so we started out pretty small, working just within our own community of building alliances within the behavioral health community. And then we've kind of started to ripple out, reaching out to like Department of Corrections, like law enforcement, like the schools. And now we're rippling out even farther and reaching into the business community. How can we work together and support each other in our work? And now I see this as we've reached across the river, building those alliances. What's happening in Iowa that, we can, I have, as a part of our national association, we have regions, and we're in a 4-state region with Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska. So I rely on my colleagues of your state associations. We get together and share and network. And so the more we can broaden our conversation, the more we can talk about what does it mean to have a healthy system of care in behavioral health, and not just within our state boundaries, but across our whole country, the better off it's going to be for all of us. Because as I said, we might have differences, but our common needs and challenges are pretty across the board. So I'm just appreciative of being able to have this conversation with my Iowa people and share not only our agricultural roots and our challenges in ag, but also in behavioral health.
Well, thank you so much, Annette. Just to give you some hope, we redesigned our mental health system in 2011 and 12. It came off of property taxes around 2015, 2016, and we're finally moving into administrative services organizations to actually run them a little bit more consistently. So it's been a decade. It's not a quick hit. Behavioral health takes time, and it should. And the changes that are super fast really disrupt the provider network, and we end up putting people out of business accidentally. So sometimes the ones that they're like, we're going to do this by July 1st, those are scarier than the ones that take 10 years because, your workforce needs to adjust. People need to understand. It just takes time. It's just not as good. But this is so exciting to hear that you're doing some really great work. And just thanks for diving in and working with an association after your term limit. That's really cool. And that's sort of my story. That's how I became a consultant, because I knew so much. The state brought me in after we passed all the legislation. So I got to write the rules for the laws I passed, which I haven't found anybody else like me in the country.
No.
So it's a crazy scenario where I got to pass laws, write the rules, and then became the basis for this job that Jason and I now share. And so it's sort of been my passion since I got into the legislature. It was like, look, I can help more people if I think about this systemically, because I was a one-on-one counselor therapist before that. So I thought, wow, if I work on policy, we can impact more people. This is kind of cool. And so you're right. You get such an opportunity to be a legislator, which was such an honor, and to meet all the people you met. And so for you to turn that into a cool job and to continue the fight is just really cool. So thanks so much for coming on today. But before we go, we always do our recovering politician self-care policy. And this one's going to be funny, but it's snowmen. I love snowmen. Come January, come on now. It's cold, it's dark, it's dreary. Sometimes the snow looks brown and nasty. So you got to find something to be excited about. And for me, all my Christmas decorations came down, but the snowmen stay out. So I found the one little thing that keeps my heart happy to give me hope till spring break. Because man, this time of year is hard for me. It's dark, it's cold, it's miserable. And so I'm trying to what's something that is exciting, and snowmen are my thing. So I keep snowmen out and they just make me smile, boost my mood, and I continue to have my house decorated. My husband's not always a fan, but here we are. So for those of you out there that need a little self-care tip, find something that decor that just makes you smile. I mean, this time of year, it's not really a holiday season. What are we going to do? Some people I know do Valentine's Day. They'll decorate their Christmas tree for Valentine's Day and keep the tree up. My husband's 100% against that, so I can't do that. So find something that matters to you. So thanks everybody for being here. We got to talk to Annette and talk all about the Nebraska Association of Behavioral Health Organizations and the great work being done in Nebraska. Talked about some of the things she sees on the horizon there in the legislature. Our legislature starts here at the same time. And so it's going to be interesting to see how much of that's the same and how much is different in the state of Iowa. So thank you everybody so much for being here. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.